The days after the Battle of Kepler Station were strange and quiet. The Vorthak fleet had vanished into the dark spaces between stars, leaving behind only wreckage and the shocked survivors of a dozen civilizations. For the first time in months, the galaxy was not at war. Admiral Choi Dong stood in his quarters aboard the Sol, reading reports from across human space. The victory had cost them dearly. 37 ships destroyed, over 2,000 crew members lost, and 1,500 fighter pilots who would never see Earth again. But they had saved the galaxy from an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. A soft chime announced a visitor at his door. Fleet Admiral Li Jun entered, wearing the new uniform that marked his promotion to Supreme Commander of the Combined Defense Fleet. His old friend looked tired, but satisfied. "The Galactic Council wants to meet with us," Li Jun said, settling into a chair across from Choi Dong's desk. "They're calling it an emergency session to discuss the new military situation." Choi Dong smiled slightly. "Let me guess. They want to know how we did it." "That, and they want to offer us things they should have offered months ago," Li Jun replied. "Full council membership, military command authority, access to their advanced technologies." Through the window, both men could see the massive bulk of the Indomitable undergoing repairs. The Supercarrier had taken heavy damage during the battle, but Chief Engineer Park Min and her crews were working around the clock to fix everything. Already the ship looked better than it had before the fight. Captain Park Hana appeared on the communication screen, calling in from the bridge of her new command, the battleship Incheon. She had been promoted to admiral after her actions during the battle, leading a group of destroyers in a desperate attack that had saved the Indomitable from destruction. "Admirals, I have news from the Outer Rim," she reported. "Our scout ships have found 3 more Vorthak fleets, but they're not attacking anyone. They seem to be hiding." This was the most interesting development since the battle. The Vorthak Empire, which had been expanding aggressively for centuries, had suddenly stopped all military operations. Their bioships were still out there, but they were avoiding contact with any other species. "They're afraid," said Admiral Choi Dong. "For the first time in their history, they met an enemy they couldn't understand or adapt to." Ambassador Kim Tae joined the conversation. From the diplomatic station orbiting Earth, her face showed a mixture of pride and concern. "The council session is tomorrow," she announced. "Every surviving civilization wants to attend. They're calling it the most important meeting in galactic history." The next day, the rebuilt council chamber on Nexus Prime was packed with representatives from across the galaxy. The human delegation entered to find thousands of alien beings watching them, with expressions ranging from gratitude to awe to barely concealed fear. High Counselor Veltara stood at the center podium, but she looked different from the confident leader who had dismissed human military power just months earlier. Her blue skin was paler, her silver eyes showed exhaustion, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen her entire civilization nearly destroyed. "Representatives of the Galactic Council," she began, "we are gathered here to address a new reality. The human fleet has accomplished what our combined forces could not. They have defeated the Vorthak Empire and saved our worlds from conquest." Murmurs filled the chamber, but they were respectful now instead of mocking. The surviving Gorvani leaders, led by War Chief Grakmor, stood and performed a formal military salute toward the human section. "The Gorvani Union requests permission to study human battle tactics," Grakmor announced in his deep, rocky voice. "We wish to learn from warriors who fight with both strength and wisdom." Similar requests came from other species. The remnants of the Ethereal Collective wanted to understand how human emotions could be used as weapons in battle. The Zephyrian Commonwealth asked for human military advisors to help rebuild their defense forces. But the biggest surprise came when Veltara announced the Council's formal apology. "We were wrong," she said simply, looking directly at Fleet Admiral Li Jun. "We dismissed human capabilities because we didn't understand them. We thought advanced technology and logical tactics were the only ways to fight a war. Humans proved that creativity, emotion, and individual initiative could be more powerful than any weapon we possess." The Council then voted unanimously to offer humanity full membership with permanent seats and military command authority. They also requested that human officers be assigned to lead the new Combined Defense Fleet, with Admiral Li Jun as Supreme Commander. Li Jun stood to accept the offers, But his response surprised many in the chamber. "Earth is honored by the Council's trust," he said, "but we don't want to rule the galaxy's military forces. We want to work with them as equals." This statement caused excited discussions throughout the chamber. Most species expected humans to demand tribute or special privileges after their victory. Instead, they were offering partnership. Ambassador Kim Tae explained the human position. "We believe that diversity makes us stronger. The Zephyrians think logically. The Gorvani fight with honor, the Ethereals understand the mind. Humans bring chaos and creativity. Together, we're stronger than any of us could be alone." The real proof of human intentions came with the announcement of the new fleet construction program. Earth would build 12 more supercarriers, each one assigned to protect a different sector of galactic space. But instead of being crewed only by humans, each ship would have mixed crews from multiple species. Captain Yoon Soo, now promoted to admiral, would command the second supercarrier, the Defiant. Chief Engineer Park Min was assigned to design new ships that combined human engineering with alien technology. Major Kim Hee, posthumously promoted to colonel for her sacrifice during the battle, became the inspiration for integrated fighter squadrons that mixed human pilots with alien crew members. The most important change was in military doctrine. Instead of each species fighting with their traditional methods, the new combined defense fleet would train all personnel in human-style tactics, unpredictable maneuvers, emotional decision-making, and individual initiative within coordinated operations. Commander Lee Na established the first tactical innovation school on a space station near Earth. Officers from every allied species came to learn how to fight like humans, with both their heads and their hearts, using logic when it worked and abandoning it when chaos was more effective. The school's motto, suggested by the late Major Kim Hee, became famous across the galaxy. Adapt to everything, but never become predictable. Meanwhile, in the dark spaces beyond known territory, the surviving Vorthak fleet struggled with a new and terrifying reality. For the first time in their species' history, they had encountered an enemy they couldn't absorb or understand. The bioship's organic computers tried constantly to analyze the human battle tactics, but the data made no sense. How could a species fight effectively without central coordination? How could emotional decisions lead to military victory? How could chaos defeat order? Some Vorthak tried to adapt by becoming more chaotic themselves, but this only made them weaker. Others attempted to study human emotions, but the feelings they absorbed from their victims were nothing like the controlled chaos humans used in battle. The Vorthak Empire, which had conquered hundreds of worlds through adaptation and assimilation, found themselves facing an enemy that couldn't be copied or understood. They were forced to retreat to their home systems and reconsider everything they thought they knew about warfare. On Earth, Admiral Choi Dong stood in his garden, looking up at the stars that no longer seemed as distant or hostile as they once had. His grandchildren played nearby, unaware that their grandfather had helped save the galaxy from conquest. A communication device chimed, and Fleet Admiral Lee Jun's image appeared. "The Council just approved construction of 5 more shipyards," Lee Jun reported. "They want to build a defense network that can protect every inhabited system in the galaxy." "And they want humans to design it?" Choi Dong asked. "They want all of us to design it together," Lee Jun corrected. "Zephyrian logic, Gorvani strength, ethereal wisdom, and human creativity. The best of every species working as one." As the sun set over Earth's capital city, both men reflected on how much had changed. Just a year ago, humans had been dismissed as primitive newcomers to the galactic community. Now they were partners in the greatest military alliance in history. The transformation wasn't just about technology or tactics. It was about understanding that diversity wasn't weakness, it was strength. Every species brought something different to the alliance, and those differences made them all more powerful. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from humanity. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem isn't with the most advanced technology or the most logical strategy. Sometimes you need to think differently, feel deeply, and be willing to do something nobody expects. Years later, when alien children asked their parents about the Great War against the Vorthak, they were told the story of how humans saved the galaxy, not through superior weapons or advanced technology, but by fighting with their hearts as well as their minds. The space around Kepler Station was filled with the broken remains of the galaxy's greatest fleets. Twisted metal floated in the darkness, pieces of ships that had once been the pride of entire civilizations. Among the wreckage, a few hundred surviving vessels huddled around the massive trading station like frightened children. High Counselor Veltara stood in the station's command center, staring at the tactical display that showed the approaching Vorthak fleet. Red dots filled the screen like a disease spreading across space. 800 enemy ships, including 12 of the massive Apex-class bio-dreadnoughts that had torn through her people's defenses. "Any word from the humans?" asked her aide, a young Zephyrian officer whose hands shook as he worked at his console. "Their fleet should arrive within the hour," Veltara replied, trying to keep hope out of her voice. She had seen what the Vorthak did to proud civilizations. The humans were brave to come, but bravery wouldn't be enough. The first sign of the human fleet was a ripple in space itself. The air around Kepler Station seemed to bend and twist as something enormous pushed through hyperspace into normal reality. Then the ships began to appear. The Indomitable came first, dropping out of hyperspace like a metal mountain. The Supercarrier was 3.2 kilometers long, bigger than most space stations. Its hull was dark gray, covered with weapon turrets and fighter launch bays. Behind it came the rest of the human fleet, battleships, destroyers, cruisers, and support vessels. But it was the Supercarrier that made every alien in the system stop and stare. They had expected a large ship, but nothing like this floating city of metal and weapons. Captain Yoon Soo stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the tactical display as her ship took its position between Kepler Station and the approaching enemy fleet. Around her, hundreds of crew members worked at their stations, preparing for the biggest battle in human history. "All fighter squadrons report ready," announced Major Kim Hee through the communication system. 3,000 fighters armed and waiting for launch orders. Chief Engineer Park Min looked up from his control panel. "All systems are operating perfectly, Captain. The ship has never run better." Yoon Soo nodded and opened a channel to Admiral Choi Dong, whose flagship had taken position nearby. "Admiral, we're ready for the briefing." Within an hour, the surviving alien leaders had gathered in the Indomitable's main briefing room. The chamber was huge but simple, designed for function rather than beauty. Holographic displays showed detailed information about human ships, weapons, and tactics. Veltara entered with the remaining Zephyrian commanders, still amazed by the size of the human ship. The few surviving Gorvani officers stomped in wearing their heavy armor, while the crystalline ethereal representatives floated through the doorway. Admiral Choi Dong stood at the front of the room beside a massive display screen. He was a small man compared to some of the aliens, but his presence filled the space around him. "Welcome aboard the Indomitable," he began. "Before we discuss battle plans, you should understand how humans fight." The screen showed images of human weapons, railguns that fired metal slugs at incredible speed, missile launchers loaded with nuclear warheads, and energy weapons that seemed simple compared to alien technology. War Chief Groktar, one of the few surviving Gorvani leaders, leaned forward in his chair. "These weapons look primitive compared to our energy cannons. How do you expect to damage Vorthak bioships with metal bullets? And where are your energy shields?" asked Veltara. "How do you protect your ships without defensive barriers?" Admiral Choi Dong smiled slightly. "We don't use energy shields because they can be adapted to. We use thick armor, redundant systems, and damage control teams. When our ships get hurt, we fix them and keep fighting." The alien leaders looked confused. Every advanced civilization used energy shields to protect their ships. The idea of relying on simple metal armor seemed backwards. Chief Engineer Park Min stepped forward and activated another display. "Our main advantage isn't our weapons or armor. It's these." The screen showed launch bays filled with thousands of small fighter craft. Each fighter was only 20 meters long, designed to carry one or two human pilots and equipped with various weapons. The ethereal representative, a crystal being called Zenara, projected confused thoughts into the room. "Why do you use individual pilots? Coordinated fleet actions are much more efficient." "Individual pilots make individual decisions," replied Major Kim Hee, entering the briefing room in her flight suit. "When the enemy adapts to one pilot's tactics, another pilot tries something completely different." Veltara studied the fighter displays with growing concern. "But how do you coordinate attacks without central control? How do you prevent chaos and confusion?" "We don't prevent chaos," Admiral Choi Dong said calmly. "We use it. Chaos is something the Vorthak have never learned to fight against. The briefing continued for 2 hours, but the alien leaders remained skeptical. Human tactics seemed random and unscientific. Their weapons appeared outdated. Their ships lacked the elegant technology that marked advanced civilizations. Commander Li Na, the human weapons officer, tried to explain their strategy. "We don't fight like a machine. We fight like a storm. Unpredictable, changing, hitting from unexpected directions." But the aliens didn't understand. They had fought wars with logic and planning for thousands of years. The human approach seemed like madness. As the briefing ended, the tactical displays began showing movement from the Vorthak fleet. The enemy bioships had started their final approach to Kepler Station. They would arrive within 18 hours. "One more thing," Admiral Choi Dong said as the alien leaders prepared to leave. "Don't try to coordinate with our fighters during the battle. Let them do what they do best." After the aliens left, Captain Yoon Soo approached the Admiral. "Sir, they think we're going to lose. They think our methods are primitive and our tactics are insane." "They're probably right about the insane part," Choi Dong replied. "But that's exactly why we might win." In the fighter bays of the Indomitable, 3,000 human pilots made their final preparations. Major Kim Hee walked among them, checking equipment and talking to her squadron leaders. These men and women had trained their entire adult lives for space combat, but none of them had ever faced an enemy like the Vorthak. "Remember," she told her pilots, "the enemy ships can adapt to whatever you do, so don't do the same thing twice. Be creative. Be unpredictable. Be human." Lieutenant Song Mi, a young pilot on her first combat mission, raised her hand. "Major, what if being unpredictable isn't enough? What if they adapt to chaos itself?" Kim Hee looked at the faces around her, young and old, nervous and confident, but all ready to fight for their species and their new alien allies. "Then we get more chaotic," she said with a grin. "We're humans. Chaos is what we do best." Outside the Supercarrier, space began to ripple and bend as the Vorthak fleet approached. The bioships emerged from hyperspace like nightmares made real, their living hulls pulsing with dark energy. Each ship was unique, grown rather than built, shaped by the combined knowledge of dozens of conquered species. At the center of the enemy fleet, the Apex-class bio-dreadnoughts hung in space like sleeping gods of war. These massive creatures had destroyed entire civilizations, their hulls containing the minds of billions of absorbed victims. But as the Vorthak ships began their attack approach, their bio-neural networks started analyzing the human fleet. The data they collected confused them. Human ship designs were crude and simple. Human weapons were primitive. Human tactics made no logical sense. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the Vorthak felt something like uncertainty. These humans didn't fight like any species they had ever absorbed. Their methods seemed random and chaotic. The bioships tried to adapt to what they were seeing, but how do you adapt to something that makes no sense? How do you counter tactics that change every few minutes? On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Choi Dong watched the enemy fleet arrange itself for battle. Around him, his officers worked calmly at their stations, preparing for the fight that would determine the fate of the galaxy. "All ships report ready," announced Captain Yoon Soo. "Fighter squadron standing by," added Major Kim Hee Choi. Dong looked out at the stars one last time, thinking of Earth and the 8 billion people who were counting on him to bring their warriors home safely. "Then let's show them what humans can do," he said quietly. "All ships prepare for battle." The Vorthak fleet moved through space like a living nightmare. 800 bioships approached Kepler Station in perfect formation, their hulls pulsing with organic light. At their center, 12 Apex-class dreadnoughts floated like dark mountains, each one larger than a human city. Admiral Choi Dong stood on the bridge of his flagship Seoul, watching the tactical display as the enemy closed in. The human fleet had positioned itself directly between the Vorthak Armada and Kepler Station, outnumbered almost 3-1. "Enemy fleet will be in weapons range in 30 minutes, reported Commander Baek Soo from the destroyer Relentless. "Their bioships are scanning us constantly. They're trying to learn our capabilities before the battle starts." On the Indomitable, Captain Yoon Soo gave her final orders to the fighter squadrons. 3,000 pilots sat in their cockpits, hands steady on their controls despite the magnitude of what they were about to face. "All squadrons, this is command," she announced over the communication system. "Remember the mission briefing. Do not engage in predictable patterns. Change your tactics every few minutes. Make them guess what you're going to do next. Major Kim Hee sat in her fighter at the head of Raptor Squadron. Around her, 24 of the best pilots in the human fleet waited for the launch order. Through her canopy, she could see the bioships growing larger as they approached. "Raptor leader to all birds," she said calmly into her radio. "Stay loose out there. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and trust each other." The Vorthak bioships had spent the last hour studying the human fleet. Their organic computers had analyzed every ship design, every weapon type, every energy signature. The data confused them because human technology seemed so primitive, but they adapted anyway. Their hulls grew thicker armor in the places where human weapons were likely to hit. Their energy shields calibrated to stop human plasma bolts and deflect kinetic rounds. Inside each bioship, thousands of absorbed minds worked together to predict human tactics. They had the battle knowledge of dozens of conquered species, from the logical Zephyrians to the brutal Gorvani. Surely these primitive humans would follow similar patterns. The battle began when the Vorthak ships opened fire from maximum range. Beams of bioenergy lanced across space, striking the human formation with devastating force. The destroyer Busan took a direct hit and exploded in a ball of fire and metal. All ships returned fire. Admiral Choi Dong ordered. The human fleet responded with a storm of metal and energy. Railguns fired tungsten slugs at near light speed. Missile tubes launched nuclear-tipped warheads. Energy cannons added their own deadly beams to the chaos. The Vorthak bioships absorbed the damage easily. Their adapted hulls deflected the railgun rounds. Their energy shields stopped the plasma bolts. Even the nuclear missiles seemed to do little more than scratch their organic armor. High Counselor Veltara watched from Kepler Station's command center, her heart sinking as she saw the human weapons fail against the enemy. "It's happening again," she whispered. "Just like with our fleets." But then something unexpected occurred. Instead of continuing the long-range bombardment, the human ships suddenly changed formation. They spread out in a seemingly random pattern and began moving at high speed toward the enemy fleet. "What are they doing?" asked the Zephyrian tactical officer. "That formation makes no strategic sense." The Vorthak bioships were equally confused. They had adapted to human weapons and tactics, but now, the humans were doing something completely different. The bioships tried to adjust, but the human fleet kept changing its approach every few minutes. Then the fighters launched. 3,000 human pilots erupted from the Indomitable's launch bays like angry insects. They didn't form neat squadron patterns like other races. Instead, they scattered in all directions, each pilot choosing his own path to the enemy. The Vorthak ships had never seen anything like it. How do you defend against 3,000 individual attackers, each one making different decisions? Their bio-neural networks tried to calculate intercept courses, but the humans kept changing direction randomly. Major Kim Hee led her squadron in a diving attack on one of the smaller bioships, but instead of firing immediately, she pulled up at the last second and flew past the enemy vessel. "Raptor leader, why didn't you engage?" asked Lieutenant Song-mi, flying on her wing. "Because they're expecting us to attack," Kim Hee replied. "Let them waste energy tracking us first." All across the battlefield, human pilots were doing unexpected things. Some flew in spirals, others made sudden stops and reversals. A few simply flew in straight lines at maximum speed, ignoring enemy fire completely. The bioship's organic brains began to overload. They had adapted to expect logical attacks, coordinated formations, and predictable tactics. But the humans weren't being logical. They were being chaotic. Squadron leader Oh-Jin led his Thunderbolt wing against one of the Apex Dreadnoughts, the massive bioship that served as the enemy flagship. The creature was 3 kilometers long, its hull covered with weapon pods and defensive systems. "All Thunderbolts, random attack pattern 7, Oh-Jin ordered. Remember, we're not trying to destroy this thing. We're trying to confuse it." The 20 heavy fighters began their attack run, but instead of focusing on one target area, each pilot chose a different part of the massive ship. Some attacked the weapon pods, others went for the engine sections. A few simply flew around the ship without firing at all. The Apex Dreadnought's bio-brain struggled to respond. It had weapons to defend against any conceivable attack, but it couldn't defend against attacks that made no sense. Its defensive systems kept switching between different modes as they tried to counter the random human tactics. Commander Baeksu brought his destroyer, Relentless, into close combat with a cluster of medium bioships. Instead of maintaining proper distance and using his long-range weapons, He ordered maximum acceleration directly toward the enemy. "Sir, we're going to ram them," his tactical officer warned. "No, we're not," Beksu replied calmly. "We're going to make them think we are." At the last possible second, the Relentless fired its maneuvering thrusters and spun sideways, bringing all its weapons to bear on the confused bioships at point-blank range. The enemy vessels had been preparing for a ramming attack and were caught completely off guard. But the real surprise came when the human fleet revealed its secret weapon: pure human emotion. Lieutenant Song Mi was flying her first combat mission when she saw her squadron leader's fighter explode under enemy fire. Major Kim Hee was gone, killed by a bioship's energy beam. For a moment, Song Mi felt fear and sadness threaten to overwhelm her. Then the fear turned to anger. The sadness became rage. And the rage made her do something no logical pilot would ever attempt. She aimed her fighter directly at the bioship that had killed her commander and pushed her engines to maximum power. The enemy vessel's defensive systems locked onto her, preparing to destroy the small craft before it could cause damage. But Song Mi wasn't planning to ram the ship. At the last second, she ejected her fighter's entire missile load at point-blank range and used her emergency thrusters to spin away from the explosion. The bioship's hull cracked under the unexpected close-range detonation. For the first time in the battle, a Vorthak vessel showed real damage. Across the battlefield, other human pilots saw what Song Mi had done. They felt the same anger, the same determination to avenge their fallen comrades. One by one, they began attempting impossible maneuvers, fueled by emotions the bioships couldn't understand or predict. The Vorthak fleet began to falter. Their bioships could adapt to any logical tactic. But how do you adapt to opponents who fight with their hearts instead of their heads? How do you counter tactics driven by love, anger, fear, and hope? The turning point came when Squadron Leader Oh Jin spotted a weakness in the enemy flagship that only human intuition could have noticed. The massive Apex dreadnought had been constantly changing its configuration to defend against the chaotic human attacks. In doing so, it had created a small gap in its armor where two biosections joined together. "This is Thunderbolt Leader to all squadrons," Oh Jin announced on an open channel. "I'm going for the flagship's weak spot. If this works, hit every large ship you can find. If it doesn't, avenge us." He pushed his heavy fighter to maximum speed and dove toward the tiny gap in the dreadnought's hull. The bioship's defenses tracked him, but they were still trying to adapt to random human tactics and couldn't respond quickly enough. Oh Jin fired every weapon he had into the gap and then rammed his fighter into the breach. The explosion was small compared to the massive bioship, but it hit exactly the right spot. The Apex dreadnought shuddered and began to break apart. Its bio-neural network, damaged by the precise strike, lost control of the ship's living systems. Within minutes, the 3-kilometer monster was drifting helplessly in space. Seeing their flagship disabled, the other Vorthak ships began to retreat. Their adaptive systems were overloaded by the chaotic human tactics. They couldn't learn to counter an enemy that refused to follow any rules of warfare. Admiral Choi Dong watched from his bridge as the surviving bioships fled into hyperspace. The most feared military force in the galaxy was running from a human fleet they had outnumbered 3-1. "Damage report," he ordered. 3 months after the Galactic Council meeting, the universe changed forever. It started with silence. The Zephyrian border station stopped sending messages first. High Command tried to contact them for 6 hours before sending scout ships to investigate. The scouts found nothing but empty space and floating metal pieces. Entire space stations had been torn apart like paper. Admiral Choi Dong sat in his command chair aboard the Earth battleship Seoul, watching the emergency reports flood in. His officers moved around him quickly, their faces showing worry and confusion. The communication screens showed panicked faces from across the galaxy. "Sir, we're getting distress calls from 12 different sectors," reported Lieutenant Commander Han Bo, his voice tight with stress. "The Zephyrian Commonwealth is requesting immediate assistance." Choi Dong had expected this moment, but it came faster than anyone predicted. The Vorthak Empire had launched their war, and it was going badly for the galaxy. Captain Yunsu's image appeared on the main screen. She was standing on the bridge of the Supercarrier Indomitable, her crew working frantically at their stations behind her. "Admiral, our deep space sensors are picking up massive movement in Vorthak territory," she reported. "At least 800 ships moving in perfect formation. They're heading for the core worlds." The next few days were a nightmare for the Galactic Council. The Vorthak bioships moved like a plague through space, destroying everything in their path. These weren't normal starships made of metal and technology. They were alive, grown in the dark spaces between stars, powered by the minds of conquered species. Each fourth-act ship could think, learn, and change during battle. When the Zephyrian energy weapons hit them, the bioship studied the damage and grew armor to stop the same attacks. When Gorvani missiles exploded against their hulls, the ships developed new skin that absorbed the explosions and used the energy to make themselves stronger. The ethereal collective tried their psychic attacks, sending waves of mental energy to confuse and control the enemy. But the Vorthak ships had thousands of enslaved minds inside them, creating a mental shield that the ethereals couldn't break through. Worse, some ethereal warriors found their own minds being pulled into the collective, adding their power to the enemy. War Chief Brockamar led his mighty dreadnoughts into battle with typical Gorvani courage. The huge armored ships fired their biggest guns at the approaching bioships, confident that their superior firepower would win the day. For the first hour, it looked like they were right. Vorthak ships exploded under the massive energy blasts, but then the surviving bioships began to change. Their hulls grew thicker and developed new shapes that deflected the Gorvani weapons. Some ships split into smaller pieces that attacked from different angles. Others combined together to form larger creatures with even more powerful weapons. Within 6 hours, the Gorvani fleet was scattered and running. Brockamar's flagship was captured intact, its crew taken alive to become part of the Vorthak collective. High Counselor Veltara watched her civilization fall from the bridge of the last Zephyrian command ship. Her people had ruled the galaxy with technology and wisdom for 3,000 years. Now they were being hunted like animals by ships that shouldn't exist. How are they doing this? She asked her science officer, a young Zephyrian named Kolrin. Our computers show it's impossible. Living ships can't adapt this quickly. Kolrin's silver eyes were wide with fear. They're not just adapting to our weapons, Counselor. They're adapting to how we think. Every time we develop a new strategy, they counter it before we can even use it properly. The truth was worse than anyone imagined. The Vorthak bioships contained the minds of every species they had ever conquered. Inside each ship were the thoughts and memories of thousands of different races. They knew how everyone in the galaxy fought because they had absorbed the knowledge from their victims. The Zephyrian Commonwealth lasted 1 week. The Gorvani Union fell in 10 days. The ethereal collective's homeworlds were overrun in just 4 days. Their psychic powers turned against them by their own captured people. Other smaller civilizations didn't even try to fight. They surrendered immediately, hoping the Vorthak would show mercy. They were wrong. The bioships took everyone and everything, adding them to their growing fleet. On Earth, Admiral Choi Dong received the desperate message from the Galactic Council. The same High Counselor Veltara who had laughed at human military power was now begging for help. Admiral Choi Dong. Her image flickered on the communication screen, damaged by interference from the approaching enemy fleet. The Galactic Council formally requests military assistance from Earth. We were wrong about human capabilities. Please help us. Choi Dong looked at the faces of his officers around the command center. Captain Yoon Soo was there in person now, having brought the Indomitable to Earth orbit for final preparations. Major Kim Hee stood beside her, representing the thousands of fighter pilots who were ready for battle. What are our casualties so far? Choi Dong asked. 0, sir, replied Commander Lee Na, the weapons specialist. No human ships have engaged the enemy yet. And our allies' casualties? The numbers were horrible. In 2 weeks, the Vorthak had destroyed or captured over 4,000 ships and conquered 18 worlds. Billions of people were dead or worse, absorbed into the bioships as living components. Choi Dong stood up and walked to the large window that showed Earth hanging in space below them. The blue planet looked peaceful and beautiful, unaware of the war raging across the galaxy. Send a message to the Galactic Council, he said finally. Tell them that Earth will provide military assistance, but we do it our way under human command. No interference from council leaders who think they know better. Captain Yoon Soo stepped forward. Sir, are we really ready for this? These bioships have defeated every military force in the galaxy. What makes us think we can do better? Choi Dong turned back to face his officers. Behind him, Earth continued its slow rotation, home to 8 billion humans who had no idea their entire species was about to be tested. Because they've never fought humans before, he said simply, Every race they've conquered fought the same way for thousands of years. Predictable tactics, logical strategies, the same old methods. He gestured toward the communication screen, which still showed the chaos of retreating alien fleets. Look at them. The Zephyrians fight with cold logic. The Gorvani use brute force. The Ethereals rely on mental powers. Every race has one way of fighting, one set of tactics. The Vorthak can study them and adapt. Major Kim Hee understood first. Her eyes lit up with a dangerous smile. But humans don't fight like that, she said. We use everything. Logic, emotion, brute force, clever tricks, teamwork, individual action. We change our tactics every few minutes if we need to. Exactly, Choi Dong nodded. How do you adapt to chaos? How do you predict the unpredictable? Lieutenant Commander Han Bo looked worried. Sir, what if we're wrong? What if they adapt to us too? Choi Dong walked back to his command chair and sat down. Around him, his officers waited for orders that would determine the fate of human civilization. Then we die fighting, he said quietly. But at least we die as humans. Send word to the fleet. We're going to war. The last message from the surviving Galactic Council forces came from Kepler Station, a massive trading post that served as the final stronghold before the core worlds. They had maybe 72 hours before the main Vorthak fleet arrived. It was time to see what humans could do in a real war. The massive space station hung in the darkness like a metal city. Nexus Prime was the center of galactic politics, where 12 different alien races came to make important decisions. Today the emergency lights were flashing red. War was coming. Captain Lee Jun walked through the long corridors of the station. His black uniform marked him as a human from Earth. Other aliens moved past him quickly, their strange forms casting odd shadows under the bright lights. Some looked like walking crystals. Others had too many arms and a few floated instead of walking. None of them paid attention to the human captain. The main council chamber was huge. Thousands of seats rose up in circles around a central platform. Each section belonged to a different alien race. The human section was small with only 3 chairs. Lee Jun sat down next to Commander Park Hana, his trusted officer. Ambassador Kim Tae was already there, looking nervous. They still think we're children playing with toys, Park Hana whispered to Lee Jun. Let them think that, Lee Jun replied quietly. It might be useful someday. The chamber fell silent as High Counselor Veltara began to speak. She was from the Zephyrian Commonwealth, a race that looked like tall, thin humans but with blue skin and silver eyes. Her voice echoed through the chamber without any technology to make it louder. The Vorthak Empire has attacked 6 more colonies, she announced. Their bioships destroyed everything. No survivors, murmurs filled the chamber. The Vorthak were the nightmare of the galaxy. They used living ships that could think and change during battle. When they conquered a planet, they took the people and turned them into parts of their ships. It was a fate worse than death. War Chief Brockamar stood up from the Gorvani section. He was huge, covered in thick armor that looked like it was part of his body. His voice was like rocks falling down a mountain. My fleets are ready for battle, he announced. Gorvani dreadnoughts have never lost a war. We will crush these Vorthak bugs. The crystalline beings from the ethereal collective made a sound like wind chimes. Their speaker, a tall crystal creature that seemed to glow from inside, projected thoughts directly into everyone's minds. Our psychic warriors can attack their minds directly. The Vorthak will fall before our mental powers. High Counselor Veltara nodded. The Zephyrian fleet has the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. Our energy beams can cut through any armor. Together we cannot lose. Lee Jun stood up slowly. All eyes turned to him. The human looked small compared to the other speakers, but his voice was clear and strong. Earth would like to help in this war, he said. We have built a new type of ship. A supercarrier called the Indomitable. It can carry thousands of fighters and has weapons that... Laughter filled the chamber. Not polite laughter, but the kind that hurt. The Gorvani war chief was making sounds like a landslide. Even the serious Zephyrians were smiling. Humans have only been in space for 50 years, Veltara said, trying to sound kind but failing. You still use chemical rockets and metal bullets. Your people fight with emotions instead of logic. Brockamar's laughter stopped, but his voice was full of humor. Human weapons are like throwing rocks at a mountain. Useless against real military power. The ethereal collective's thoughts pressed against everyone's minds again. Humans are too emotional for war. They make decisions with their hearts, not their brains. This makes them weak and unpredictable. Ambassador Kim Tae tried to speak, but Veltara raised her hand for silence. "We appreciate Earth's offer," she said in the tone adults use with children. "But this war requires advanced technology and experienced warriors. Perhaps it would be better if humans focused on evacuating their colonies. When we win this war, we will protect Earth from future attacks." The vote was quick and brutal. 12 races voted to exclude humans from the military alliance. Only Earth voted against it. The message was clear. Humans were not ready for real war. Lee Jun stood up again. His face showed no emotion, but Park Hana could see the anger in his eyes. "Earth accepts the Council's decision," he said formally. "We will prepare to defend our own territory if needed." As the three humans left the chamber, alien voices filled the air behind them. They were already making plans for the war, talking about which race would lead which battle, how to divide up Vorthak territory after victory. No one mentioned humans again. In the corridor, Ambassador Kim Tae was shaking with anger. "How dare they treat us like children? We helped build this council. We shared our knowledge freely." Park Hana's hand moved to her weapon, but Lee Jun shook his head slightly. "Not here," he said quietly. "Not yet." They walked to their small ship in silence. Once inside, Lee Jun opened a secure communication channel to Earth Command. Admiral Choi Dong's face appeared on the screen, his expression serious. "I heard about the vote," Choi Dong said. "Are you coming home?" "Not yet," Lee Jun replied. "I want to watch how this war begins. We might learn something useful." "The Indomitable is ready for action," Choi Dong continued. "All systems tested. The crew is eager to show what humans can do in battle." Lee Jun smiled for the first time since the meeting. "Tell them to wait. Our time will come sooner than anyone expects." Park Hana looked at the communication screen showing their supercarrier. It was massive, bigger than most alien cities. Inside were thousands of fighters, each one piloted by a human who had trained their whole life for war. The ship had weapons that could destroy planets, and armor that could survive a star's explosion, but the galaxy thought it was just a big metal toy. "Sir," Park Hana said carefully, "what if they're right? What if we're not ready for this kind of war?" Lee Jun looked out at the stars through the ship's window. Somewhere out there, the Vorthak were preparing to destroy everything the galaxy had built. The other races were confident they could win with their advanced technology and centuries of experience. "Hana," he said quietly, "every race in that chamber has fought wars the same way for thousands of years. They use the same tactics, the same thinking, the same predictable methods." He turned to face her, and his eyes were hard as steel. "The Vorthak have conquered dozens of worlds because they can adapt to any enemy they've seen before. But they've never seen anything like humans in battle. They've never faced people who fight with both their hearts and their minds." The small human ship left Nexus Prime and jumped to hyperspace. Behind them, the galaxy's greatest military minds were planning a war they were certain they would win. They had no idea what was coming.